Have you ever just stopped and wondered, what did the very first song sound like? I mean, really think about it. It's a question that throws us way, way back in time, like tens of thousands of years back, into a world with no records, no writing, nothing. It's a hunt for the very first spark of human creativity. So today, let's put on our detective hats and dive into this prehistoric mystery to find the world's oldest instruments. So here's the big question, right? When did we, as a species, go from just hearing the sounds of nature to actually creating our own? Well, the answer is a whole lot messier and honestly way more fascinating than you might think. And our investigation all starts with one single, really mysterious object. All right, our first piece of evidence takes us deep into a cave in Slovenia. What you're about to see is a fragment of bone that has kicked off one of the biggest, most heated debates in the entire field of archaeology. Is this it? Is this the key to unlocking the soundtrack of the Stone Age? Okay, meet our prime suspect, the Divje Babe flute. It was found back in 1995, and what it is a piece of a young cave bear's thigh bone. But look, it's got these holes in it. The team that found it was convinced they'd hit the jackpot, a musical instrument made by Neanderthals. And get a load of that number, 60,000 years old. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. To put that into perspective, if this thing really is a flute, it's older than any other known instrument by about 20,000 years. That would mean our ancient cousins, the Neanderthals, were making music long before modern humans got around to it. The implications here are just massive. You know, as the National Museum of Slovenia says, this isn't just about a song. It's about completely rewriting who we thought Neanderthals were. Not just brutes, but complex, spiritual beings. But of course, in any good detective story, things are never quite that simple. Right, so just as the world was starting to get used to this idea of musical Neanderthals, a totally different theory showed up. And this one, well, it replaced the musician with a suspect that had a much bigger bite. And this is the question that's at the absolute heart of the debate. Was this bone carefully carved by a thinking hand to create music, or are we just looking at the leftovers of an ancient dinner? Let's break down the evidence for both sides. Okay, in this corner, you've got the musician theory. The folks on this side, they point to the spacing of the holes. They argue that it's not random, that it could actually produce notes on a musical scale. But then, in the other corner, you have the hyena theory. The skeptics say, hold on a minute. They argue those holes are just puncture marks, a perfect match for the bite of an Ice Age hyena chowing down on a bone. And they point out there aren't any clear tool marks around the holes, which you'd totally expect to see if someone had carved them. So, flute or fang? The jury is still very much out on this one. Now, while the case of the Divje Babe flute is still this amazing unsolved puzzle, our story doesn't stop there. Not at all. Because if we just shift our focus a little bit, we find the artifacts that everyone agrees on, the confirmed, undisputed first notes of our human story. And, you know, this is kind of how science works. When one piece of evidence is super debated, you look for the other stuff, the things that are absolutely rock solid. And to find those, we're going to travel from Slovenia over to southwestern Germany. And here, archaeologists have found flutes that leave absolutely no room for doubt. These are the Aurignacian flutes, and they weren't made by Neanderthals. They were made by our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens. Now, these instruments date back to around 40,000 years ago. So yeah, they might be 20,000 years younger than the Divje Babe artifact, but their status as actual, real-deal musical instruments is totally unquestioned. So what makes scientists so sure about these ones? Well, the craftsmanship tells the whole story. These weren't just some accidentally punctured bones. We're talking about instruments made from hollow bird bones, and get this, mammoth ivory, which is incredibly hard to work with. They've got clear carving marks, And even these little carved out areas around the finger holes to create a perfect airtight seal. This is intentional. This is sophisticated design. There's no doubt about it. But our ancestors' musical world wasn't just about flutes. Not even close. The evidence we have suggests that early humans had this whole surprisingly diverse range of instruments. We're basically looking at a full-on prehistoric orchestra. So this timeline here, it shows a global explosion of musical creativity. You'll see dates in BP, that just means before present, and BCE. So after those German flutes from 40,000 years ago, we find an 18,000-year-old conch shell in France that was modified to be used as a horn. And by 7,000 BCE in China, we find the incredible jiahu flutes, made from crane bones and capable of playing really complex melodies. It's just amazing. But melody was really only half the story, right? You need a beat. And the pulse of rhythm, the actual heartbeat of music, was just as ancient and, you could argue, just as important. So while things like wooden logs and animal skin drums have obviously decomposed by now, archaeologists have found other stuff. They've found collections of rocks that produce different musical tones when you strike them. They're called lithophones. And even cooler, in Ukraine, they found a 24,000-year-old percussion set made from decorated mammoth bones. This tells us that rhythm was probably central to things like rituals and dancing. So all of this brings us to the biggest question of all. I mean, think about it. In a brutal Ice Age world where just surviving to the next day was a struggle, why on earth would our ancestors spend precious time and energy making music? Seriously, why do we have this universal, fundamental drive to create sounds and rhythms? Well, according to evolutionary psychologists, the answer is that music wasn't just art. It wasn't a luxury. It was actually a tool for survival. And this gets to the very heart of why music matters so much. It wasn't just for fun. Playing music together releases hormones like oxytocin that strengthen social bonds. It helps small groups cooperate better, whether that's on a hunt or defending against predators. You could use rhythmic chants to coordinate work, or use drum beats to send warnings across long distances. The bottom line is, cohesive musical groups, well, they simply had a better chance of making it. So, from a mysterious bone in a cave to a global prehistoric orchestra, the story of music is really the story of us. It's a fundamental part of who we are. Those first instruments, they tell a story of survival, of community, of spirituality. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What story will our instruments, from electric guitars to digital synthesizers, tell about us 60,000 years from now?